swallowed the Ardennes in silence. Snow drifted down in endless white sheets, blanketing the trees, the valleys, and the roads, until it seemed the entire world had frozen. The air was sharp enough to cut, and even the crows had stopped crying. It was the kind of cold that crept under uniforms and into bones, reminding every soldier that the land itself was as deadly as the enemy. In the middle of that white wilderness, the German armored column waited, black iron monsters half buried in snow. Their engines idled low and steady, smoke rising like breath from the nostrils of sleeping beasts. Rows of Panzer IVs and Tigers crouched behind ridges, their long barrels pointed toward the west, where the Americans were rumored to be regrouping. General Erwin Klausner stood beside one of the tanks, his heavy coat dusted with frost, the gold eagle on his cap dulled by the cold. His face was sharp, lined with years of war and the arrogance of victory. He had fought in Poland, in France, and in Russia, had seen entire armies broken and scattered. To him, the Ardennes was merely another line on a map to be redrawn in German gray.
A junior officer approached through the snow, binoculars in hand. "Herr General," he said with a grin, "you'll want to see this."
Klausner raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. The officer handed him the binoculars, pointing toward the distant tree line. Through the swirling snow, a tiny speck moved slowly across the field. A small, boxy vehicle, olive in color, bouncing over the drifts.
"A jeep," the officer said with amusement. "The Americans are still sending their toys to war." The other officers nearby laughed. One spat into the snow. Pathetic. Their machines look like farm trucks. Do they expect to fight tanks with those? Klausner chuckled, lowering the binoculars. Perhaps they think they can win by speed, but no speed in the world outruns a shell. He turned to his adjutant. "Tell the men to save their ammunition. If the Americans want to play with toys, let them." The laughter echoed through the camp, sharp, confident, and cruel. It was the laughter of men who believed they had already won. But far across the forest, on the other side of that frozen valley, a small group of Americans huddled around a fire no larger than a helmet flame. Their faces were drawn and pale, wrapped in scarves and frost-bitten gloves. They didn't have tanks or half-tracks, only a handful of men and one old Willys MB Jeep, its paint chipped and its canvas top sagging with ice. Captain James "Jimmy" McAllister leaned over the Jeep's hood, a map spread open beneath his gloved hands. The dim lantern light flickered across his face. Tired eyes, a 2-day beard, and a scar that ran from his ear down his jaw. He had once been a mechanic before the war, fixing tractors in Kansas. Now he was fixing strategies under gunfire. Beside him stood his sergeant, Tom "Red" Hanley, tall, broad-shouldered, and stubborn as the Jeep itself. His hair, once red as rust, was now buried beneath a layer of frost. He held his M1 Garand in one hand, his breath visible in the icy air. "You sure about this, Captain?" Red asked, glancing toward the distant ridge. "They've got armor up there, real armor. 2 Panzers, maybe a Tiger. One shell from those, and this little Jeep will turn into a coffin." McAllister didn't look up. "It's not about the armor," he said. "It's about what they expect us to do." Red frowned. "And what do they expect?" "They expect us to come down the road," McAllister said, tracing a finger across the map. "They expect big vehicles, heavy artillery, something that leaves tracks they can see and destroy. They don't expect this." He tapped the hood of the Jeep. "They'll never think a machine this small can cut through the woods and hit them from behind." Red shook his head, half smiling. "You've got more faith in that tin can than in the army, Captain." McAllister finally looked up, eyes narrowing in the dark. "Faith's got nothing to do with it. This Jeep's faster than anything they've got. It doesn't freeze, doesn't choke on mud. It goes where their steel monsters can't. The wind howled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like thunder rolling across the hills. The Jeep's olive paint glowed dull in the lantern light, the white star on its hood nearly hidden beneath frost. McAllister folded the map, tucking it into his jacket. If we can reach that bridge and take out their fuel trucks, their tanks are dead weight. No fuel, no movement. No movement, no attack.
"And if they see us first?" Red asked quietly.
Then we make it fast.
The two men exchanged a look, not of courage, but of understanding. They'd both seen enough of war to know what fast meant.
Red tightened his gloves and gave the Jeep's fender a pat. "Well, I guess it's you and us again, girl. Let's see if you can outsmart a few Panzers." McAllister climbed into the driver's seat, turning the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then came alive with a low growl that seemed far too small to be part of a war this large.
Behind them, a few other soldiers watched silently from their foxholes, their faces pale under their helmets. One of them muttered, "They're driving straight into hell."
McAllister heard it, but didn't respond. He gripped the wheel, his eyes locked on the shadowed forest ahead. "Hell's just another road, Sergeant," he said quietly. "You just have to know where it ends." The Jeep rolled forward, tires crunching through the snow, disappearing into the trees.
Back on the German side, General Klausner climbed into his half-track, the laughter of his officers still echoing behind him. "Americans," he said, shaking his head. "They think courage makes up for engineering."
The officer beside him smirked. "By the time they reach the bridge, they'll be ash." Klausner gave a thin smile. If they even make it that far. He didn't know then that somewhere, beyond his line of sight, that small olive Jeep was already weaving through the forest, not charging at his tanks, but slipping between them like a whisper. The night grew colder. The sky thickened with cloud. In the distance, a wolf howled, its cry carried on the wind. And beneath the sound of the storm, the faint hum of an American engine cut through the dark, small, defiant, and unstoppable. The Germans laughed that night, their voices carried across the snow. They laughed at the idea of a Jeep defying their armored divisions. They laughed because they couldn't imagine anything so small could be dangerous. But in war, as history has always proven, the things most underestimated often become the things most feared. And before the sun would rise again over those frozen hills, the laughter of the German commanders would be silenced by the fire of their own destruction, all because of the little machine they mocked and the two men who dared to drive it straight into the lion's mouth. The Ardennes was holding its breath, and in that breath was the birth of a legend. The forest had gone quiet, the kind of silence that made even breathing feel too loud. The little Jeep crawled through the snow like a shadow, its headlamps wrapped in burlap, the light reduced to a faint glow that barely kissed the ground ahead. The night was thick with fog, and every tree looked like a soldier frozen mid-step, rifles of ice jutting from their branches. Captain McAllister gripped the wheel tightly, his gloved hands stiff from the cold. Each turn of the tires sent a soft crunch into the stillness, and each crunch felt like a gunshot in the dark. The engine murmured steadily, low, loyal, unafraid. "Keep her steady, Red," McAllister whispered without looking away from the road ahead. Red Hanley, sitting beside him, scanned the tree line through the narrow slit between the Jeep's canvas flaps. His rifle rested across his lap, safety off. "Steady's all I can do," he muttered. "Can't see more than 20 feet. Feels like driving into the devil's mouth." McAllister cracked a faint smile. "Then let's hope the devil's asleep."
Behind them, strapped to the Jeep's back, was a crate of high explosives, just enough to take out a fuel convoy or bridge if placed right. It was a risky mission from the start. Infiltrate enemy lines, locate the supply point feeding the German armored division, and cripple their tanks by cutting off their fuel. No tanks meant no advance. And no advance meant a chance, maybe the only one, for the American lines to regroup. The snow deepened as they climbed a small ridge, the Jeep's tires fighting for grip. The forest thinned slightly, revealing a clearing below. In the moon's faint light, they could see it, a stretch of road winding through the valley, lined with dark, hulking shapes. Fuel trucks. McAllister eased the Jeep to a stop, cutting the engine. The sudden silence rang loud in their ears. Steam rose from the hood, fading into the cold air like a sigh. Red leaned forward, peering through the branches. "There's at least 6 trucks," he said, voice low. "And, damn, looks like 2 Panzer escorts." McAllister's jaw tightened. The tanks were positioned at both ends of the convoy like bookends of steel, their turrets motionless but ready. The Germans had parked smart. They weren't taking chances. "Guess that's our dance floor," McAllister said quietly. Red shot him a sideways look. "That's a suicide floor, Captain." But McAllister wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had fixed on something at the far end of the convoy. A small bridge crossing a frozen creek, half shrouded in mist. Wooden, narrow, fragile-looking. If the bridge went up, the whole convoy would be trapped on this side. No way in, no way out. "That's the key," he whispered. "If we blow that bridge, they're stuck. Tanks can't move without fuel, and the fuel can't move without that bridge." Red exhaled, watching his breath disappear into the cold. "You're really gonna make that Jeep dance, huh?" McAllister smiled grimly. "That's what she was built for." They waited for several minutes, studying the movement of the German guards. Every few moments, a sentry with a lantern walked the perimeter, his boots crunching in the snow, his rifle slung lazily over one shoulder. The rest of the men huddled near fires, unaware that death was crawling toward them on 4 small wheels. Finally, McAllister turned the key again. The Jeep shuddered to life with a soft growl. He guided it down the slope, moving slow enough that even the engine seemed to hold its breath. They slipped through the trees, weaving between shadows, until they reached the edge of the clearing. McAllister killed the lights completely, relying only on moonlight now. The Jeep was nearly invisible, a dark, low silhouette against the snow. Red kept one hand on his rifle, the other gripping the dashboard. "You sure she's quiet enough?" McAllister smirked faintly. "Quieter than a Tiger tank." They crept closer. The Jeep's small frame allowed it to hug the terrain, rolling softly over patches of snow that would have bogged down a heavier vehicle. At 50 yards out, they could hear the Germans laughing faintly near the fires. A radio played a scratchy tune, something old, something far too human for a night like this. Red's pulse thudded in his ears. He looked over at McAllister. "They're laughing," he whispered. McAllister nodded. "Let them." The Jeep stopped behind a fallen tree, perfectly concealed. McAllister pulled out the detonator cord and checked the explosives. The plan was simple, but mad. Plant the charges beneath the bridge, sneak back to the ridge, and blow it once the Germans started moving. But war rarely respected plans. They moved quickly, McAllister crawling through the snow toward the bridge, Red covering him from the Jeep. The snow soaked through his pants instantly, and the cold bit into his knees like knives. He could hear the creak of the wood under the bridge, the slow whisper of the creek below. He worked fast, wiring the charges under the main beam. His fingers were numb, his breath shallow. Each click of the detonator felt deafening in the quiet. From the Jeep, Red watched through the scope, heart pounding. 2 German guards began walking toward the bridge, their lanterns swinging softly.
"Cap," he whispered, "you've got company." McAllister didn't look up. He clipped the last wire and whispered into his radio, "Done. Coming back." Red kept his rifle trained on the approaching figures. "Hurry it up." McAllister crawled backward, every muscle tight with fear. One of the guards paused, frowning. He had seen something, a glint of metal, maybe the flicker of movement. His hand went to his rifle. Red's finger tensed on the trigger. But before the guard could react, the wind picked up, hard, and blew a sheet of snow from the trees above. It crashed down like an avalanche, covering the bridge and the bank. The guard cursed, shielding his face. McAllister used the moment to dash the last few feet to the jeep. He dove inside, landing hard. "Go!" Red didn't hesitate. The jeep roared to life, spinning in the snow before catching grip and shooting back into the forest. Behind them, the German sentries shouted, their voices cutting through the night. Bullets snapped through the trees, tearing into bark. The jeep swerved wildly, bouncing over roots and drifts. "Hold her steady," McAllister yelled. "I'm trying," Red shouted back. "She wasn't made for ballet." They broke through the trees, the forest exploding with gunfire behind them. The jeep jolted and skidded, but it kept moving, its little engine screaming against the cold and chaos. When they reached the ridge again, McAllister grabbed the detonator. He glanced back one last time, the convoy lights flickering through the fog, the bridge barely visible in the distance. He pressed the switch. The explosion shattered the night. A bloom of fire rose over the valley, lighting the snow in hues of orange and red. The shockwave rippled through the trees, shaking the jeep where it stood. The sound rolled like thunder, echoing through the forest. Red stared, wide-eyed. Holy hell! McAllister just exhaled, his breath trembling. No bridge. No fuel. Down below, chaos erupted. German soldiers ran in all directions, shouting orders, their fires extinguished by the shockwave. The tank's engines roared to life, but they couldn't move forward. The bridge was gone, and the frozen creek was too unstable to cross. The jeep, small and scarred, idled quietly on the ridge like a wolf watching a burning camp. McAllister looked over at Red, a faint smirk breaking the tension. "They laughed at this thing," he said. "Guess the joke's on them." Red chuckled, shaking his head. "Ain't much, this jeep, but she's got teeth." In the valley below, the German officers screamed for engineers and reinforcements. But the truth was already written in fire. Their mighty armored division had been outsmarted by 2 men, a handful of explosives, and a 4-cylinder miracle. The jeep turned and disappeared back into the forest, the snow swallowing its tracks almost instantly. And behind them, the fire burned bright, a symbol of defiance against the arrogance of steel. The valley had turned into a cauldron of fire and fury. The explosion's echo still bounced between the ridges when the German camp erupted in chaos. Men scrambled from their tents, shouting in confusion, their faces lit by the blaze that devoured the bridge. Flames twisted skyward like writhing serpents, licking the black smoke that drifted into the moonlight. The once orderly convoy was now a battlefield of panic. Soldiers running, trucks reversing blindly, and tank crews shouting orders through the din. General Klausner stormed from his command vehicle, his greatcoat flaring behind him like a dark banner. His eyes were wide with disbelief. Where the bridge once spanned the frozen creek, there was now only a crater, jagged ice, burning wood, and fuel splashing into the water below, igniting into rivers of flame. "Verdammt!" he roared, slamming his fist into the side of his half-track. "Who did this?" An aide ran to him, trembling. Herr General, sentries report movement in the forest, small vehicle, heading west, likely American reconnaissance. Klausner turned sharply, his breath visible in the cold. A small vehicle? You mean to tell me a jeep did this? The aide hesitated. It appears so, sir. The general's jaw clenched. Behind him, one of the officers, the same who had laughed earlier, whispered, "Impossible. A jeep couldn't carry enough." Klausner cut him off with a glare that could freeze fire. "You think this is impossible? Then explain the burning bridge." The officer fell silent. Klausner turned toward his tank commanders. "Get the Panzers moving. They're heading into the forest. Flush them out. I want that vehicle destroyed and those men captured." Engines roared to life, their thunder rolling through the valley. 2 Panzer IVs pivoted, crushing snow and debris beneath their treads. Infantry units scrambled onto half-tracks, headlights cutting through the smoke as they pursued the faint trail the jeep had left behind. But the forest was a labyrinth, and the jeep, small, fast, and cunning, was already miles ahead. Up in the hills, McAllister and Red could see the orange glow spreading behind them. The explosion had done more than destroy the bridge. It had lit a night for miles. The wind carried the sound of chaos, engines shouting, and the metallic groan of tanks awakening. "They're coming," Red said quietly, peering through the darkness. McAllister nodded. "Good. Means they're angry. Angry men make mistakes." The jeep bounced over a ridge, snow spraying from its tires. The engine whined under the strain, but it didn't falter. The old Willy Zambi had survived mud, sand, rain, and now snow. A creature built for hardship, not comfort. Its windshield was streaked with frost, its tires nearly bald, its canvas top torn and flapping like a wounded flag. Red tightened his scarf, shivering. "We can't outrun tanks forever." "Not planning to," McAllister said. "We just need to make it to Hill 209. There's a radio post there. We signal command, they can send artillery support." He didn't mention the other truth, that the hill was nearly 10 miles away, and the jeep's fuel gauge was flirting with empty. The forest thickened around them, the moonlight barely reaching the snow below. Branches clawed at the canvas roof, and the sound of the engine seemed louder now, too loud. McAllister slowed the jeep, easing it between the trees. Behind them, faint but growing, came the mechanical rumble of treads. The Panzers were closing in. "They're splitting up," Red said, listening. "One circling left, the others flanking right." "Let 'em," McAllister replied. "They're too big for this terrain. They'll choke on their own armor before they catch us." He turned sharply, steering down a narrow ravine. The jeep tilted dangerously, skidding on the icy slope before catching traction again. Smoke exploded from the tires as they descended into a hollow. The sound of tank guns firing echoed above, wild, desperate shots that shattered trees and sent shards of bark raining down. One shell hit close, the explosion sending the jeep airborne for a second before slamming back into the ground. Red grunted, gripping the dashboard. "Next one, and we're done," he shouted. McAllister's voice was steady. "Then let's make sure there isn't a next one." He wrenched the wheel hard, cutting through the ravine until they found an old logging trail. It was barely visible under the snow, but it offered cover, a tunnel of trees shielding them from the tank's line of sight. Behind them, the Panzers struggled to turn. The forest groaned under their weight as they tried to force their way through. One tank's tread slipped on the icy slope, grinding uselessly against rock. The forest was no place for giants. McAllister pressed the pedal down, urging the jeep faster. The engine sputtered, then steadied, a loyal growl in the dark. Red leaned back, laughing breathlessly. "I swear, this little thing's got a soul." "She's got more than that,"
McAllister said. "She's got a mission."
They drove for another hour, weaving through the labyrinth of snow and trees. The sound of pursuit faded gradually, replaced only by the wind and the crunch of the Jeep's tires. Finally, McAllister slowed, bringing the Jeep to a stop near a frozen stream. Both men sat in silence, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The only light came from the moon, silver and distant. Red rubbed his hands together. "Think we lost him?" "For now," McAllister said. "But they'll keep hunting. Pride won't let them stop." He climbed out, stretching his stiff legs. The forest was eerily still again, the calm after the storm. But McAllister's instincts buzzed. Something about the silence didn't feel right. He moved toward a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, he could still see the faint glow of the burning convoy far to the east. But closer, too close, flickers of light moved between the trees.
"Headlamps."
He ducked low. "They're sweeping the forest," he said quietly. "Infantry patrols. They've spread out." Red cursed under his breath. How many? Too many. They had minutes at best. McAllister glanced at the Jeep, then at the stream. The ice gleamed faintly, the water beneath still moving slow. An idea sparked. Risky, desperate, but maybe just enough. He ran back to the Jeep and started unloading gear. "Help me push her," he said. "Push her? Where?" "Into the creek." Red blinked. "You're kidding." "No time," McAllister snapped. "We hide her under the bank. They'll never think to look in the river." Together they pushed, the Jeep's tires sliding over the snow until it reached the edge. With one final heave, the little vehicle slipped down into the icy water, half submerged under the frozen bank. The current was slow enough to hold it in place. The engine hissed as cold water met hot metal. Steam rose like breath. They crouched low behind a fallen tree, rifles ready. The first German patrol appeared minutes later. 6 men in white camouflage, moving carefully, lantern light bobbing through the dark. They spoke in low voices, scanning the area. McAllister's pulse pounded. One wrong sound, one glint of metal, and it would be over. The Germans paused near the creek, one of them stepping onto the bank. The ice cracked faintly under his boot. He looked down. For a moment, it seemed like he saw something beneath the surface. Red held his breath. His finger hovered over the trigger. Then one of the Germans called out from the trees, and the soldier turned away. They moved on, their lights fading slowly into the forest. Only when the last glimmer of lanterns disappeared did McAllister exhale. He looked at Red, who grinned weakly. "Well," Red whispered, "guess she's a submarine now." McAllister chuckled softly, but his eyes were already scanning the darkness. "She'll dry," he said, "and when she does, she'll run again, just like always." They sat in silence for a long time, the night cold and endless. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled, far off, like thunder rolling behind the clouds. The Jeep lay hidden beneath the ice, silent, patient, a sleeping giant in miniature. By dawn, the Germans would still be searching the forest, furious and confused. They'd find tracks, burned wreckage, and maybe footprints, but not the Jeep. Not yet. Because this fight was far from over. And before the next sunset, the small machine that the German commanders had laughed at would return, one last time, to remind them that sometimes the greatest weapons in war aren't made of steel, but of will. Dawn came slow and gray over the Ardennes. The night's fire had long since died, leaving only blackened skeletons of trucks and the charred remains of what once was the pride of a German armored convoy. Smoke still clung to the trees, and the scent of burned fuel and frozen metal hung heavy in the air. General Klausner stood on the ridge, staring at the destruction. His gloves were black with soot, and his face, usually calm, composed, was twisted with fury. His men had spent the entire night trying to salvage what they could, but the damage was beyond repair. The bridge was gone. Half the convoy lay in ruin. The fuel reserves that were meant to drive his tanks westward now burned in rivers of oil and fire.
"How many trucks destroyed?" he demanded.
5, Herr General, replied an officer, shivering not just from the cold. And 2 others are disabled. Our engineers are attempting a makeshift crossing, but it will take at least a day.
Klausner turned slowly, his gaze cold as the snow. A day? A day is a lifetime in war.
He turned his eyes toward the horizon, toward the forest where the trail of the small American vehicle had vanished. He could still hear its ghostly hum in his mind, mocking him.
"That Jeep," he muttered, "that toy, it humiliated my division."
The officer hesitated. "We believe it's been destroyed, sir. Patrols found tire tracks ending near the creek. The ice broke there. They likely drowned."
Klausner looked back toward the valley. "You believe it? Belief is for priests. I want proof. Until I see their bodies, I'll assume that little machine still breathes." The officer swallowed hard and nodded. Miles away, the forest slowly woke beneath the pale morning sun. The snow glimmered faintly, and a thin mist curled between the trees. From beneath the frozen creek bank, a faint gurgle of water rose, followed by a low, struggling cough of an engine. The Jeep's headlights flickered weakly, then went dark again. McAllister leaned under the hood, his hands numb, sleeves soaked to the elbows. He had spent hours clearing ice from the carburetor, whispering to the machine as though coaxing a wounded soldier back to life. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "You've been through worse." Red sat nearby on a rock, rifle resting across his knees, eyes darting through the fog. "We've been lucky so far," he said. "Luck like that don't last forever." McAllister grinned faintly. "This isn't luck. It's American engineering." He hit the ignition again. The starter groaned, coughed, then roared. The Jeep sputtered once, then caught full breath. The sound was rough but steady, alive. Steam rose from its grill, the engine shaking off frost like an animal shaking rain. Red stood, smiling despite himself. "Well, I'll be damned. She's tougher than both of us." "Don't jinx it," McAllister said, climbing behind the wheel. He revved the engine once, feeling it vibrate through the seat, that familiar heartbeat of steel and willpower. "We're not out yet." They drove out from under the creek bank, the Jeep climbing the frozen embankment like a beast reborn. The sun glinted off the melted ice that clung to its sides, and the tracks it left gleamed like scars across the snow. "Where to now, Captain?" Red asked. "Back east," McAllister said, "toward the ridge. If the Germans are still there, they'll be regrouping. Maybe we can give them something else to think about." Red blinked. "You're not talking about another attack?" McAllister's eyes were calm. "We don't need to attack. Just remind them we're still here." He turned the wheel, guiding the Jeep through the trees. Back at the German camp, Klausner's men worked feverishly to clear the wreckage. Engineers laid planks across the creek, shouting orders, their movements stiff with exhaustion. One tank had tried to cross too early and now sat half submerged, smoke rising from its engine. It was late morning when the first rumor spread. A sentry, positioned near the western edge of the forest, reported hearing an engine, small, distant, but unmistakable. The report was met with laughter at first. "A Jeep?" one soldier scoffed. "Maybe it's the wind." But an hour later, another patrol swore they'd seen movement near the tree line, something green and low, darting between shadows. By noon, the laughter had stopped.
Klausner paced his command post, eyes dark beneath the brim of his cap. "They mock us," he muttered. "That machine is taunting us." He ordered half his infantry to form a perimeter around the clearing. Machine gun nests were set up, mortars aligned. The tanks, those great iron beasts, stood motionless, barrels aimed at the forest like the eyes of predators waiting for prey. The forest, however, was still. Too still. Then came the first shot. A single crack of a rifle echoed through the trees, followed by a shout. A German soldier fell near one of the trucks. Panic rippled through the ranks. The men aimed their rifles at the woods, firing wildly. Snow exploded off branches as bullets tore through them. But there was nothing there. Only silence. Minutes passed. Then, from the opposite side of the clearing, the same thing. A shot, then a shadow. This time, it was closer. Klausner grabbed his binoculars, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, until he saw it. A faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off metal, small, low to the ground. The Jeep! It darted out from behind a cluster of trees, tires spinning, engine howling like a dare. McAllister drove straight across the open ground, weaving through the wreckage, the white star on the hood flashing in the light. "Feuer!" Klausner bellowed. Machine guns roared to life, stitching the snow with lines of fire. Bullets chased the Jeep as it zigzagged between craters and burning debris. Shards of snow and ice flew in all directions. Red returned fire with his rifle, each shot precise, measured. He hit a gunner's nest, then another, forcing the Germans to duck. The Jeep skidded around the shell of a destroyed truck, smoke swirling around it like fog. It wasn't fighting, it was distracting. McAllister wanted them to look, to chase, to waste precious ammunition on something they couldn't catch. The Panzers tried to move, their treads grinding over the icy ground, but the melted snow had turned to slush. One tank's engine sputtered and died, its crew cursing as they tried to restart it. Klausner slammed his fist against his command table. "How can this be? How can a Jeep outfight us?" An aide stammered, "It's not fighting, sir. It's mocking us." And it was. The little machine tore across the clearing, looping back into the trees before the Germans could line up another shot. Its engine faded into the distance again, like a ghost slipping back into the shadows. When the gunfire stopped, the only sound left was the wind. Klausner stared at the forest, his rage trembling just beneath his composure. "That vehicle," he said quietly, "has become a symbol to them. They think it's clever. They think it's invincible." He turned to his officers. "Then we will prove it's mortal. Double the patrols. I want that Jeep found before nightfall. Burn every tree if you must." But by nightfall, no one had found it. The men whispered now about the American ghost that haunted the woods. They said the engine could be heard even when there was no vehicle in sight, that it appeared from the mist, struck without warning, then vanished. Superstition spread through the ranks, and even Klausner felt the weight of it pressing on his pride. Out there in the dark, somewhere beyond the glow of campfires, the little Jeep waited, quiet, invisible, alive. Inside its cabin, McAllister and Red sat with the engine off, listening to the distant German shouts echo through the forest. Red broke the silence. "They're scared, Captain." McAllister nodded slowly. "Good. Fear's heavier than any tank." He looked through the cracked windshield toward the horizon, where dawn would rise again soon. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we finish this." The Jeep's metal gleamed faintly in the moonlight, its tires caked with snow, its hood dented from battle, a survivor of impossible odds. To the Germans, it had become a phantom. To McAllister and Red,
It was hope on 4 wheels. And as the wind howled through the frozen trees, the legend of the laughing commanders and the jeep that outsmarted their tanks was far from over. The forest held its breath again, waiting for the storm to return. The night before the final stand was silent, too silent. Snow drifted lazily from the black sky, muffling the forest in a blanket of ghostly calm. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, and beneath them the little jeep sat half-buried in frost, its metal skin gleaming under the moon. Steam rose faintly from the hood, and inside 2 men waited, exhausted, hungry, but unbroken. McAllister sat with his back against the driver's door, rifle across his lap. His face was drawn, eyes dark from days without real rest. Red dozed beside him, his helmet tilted forward, breathing slow. Every so often, the captain would glance at him and smile faintly. In the distance, the faint echo of German voices drifted on the wind, patrols, searching, shouting, growing closer. "They're tightening the net," Red murmured when he woke, rubbing his eyes. "They know we're still out here." McAllister didn't answer right away. He stared out the windshield, frost creeping across the glass like veins. "They know," he said softly, "but they don't understand." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," McAllister said, starting the engine with a rough growl, "they're still fighting us like soldiers. We stopped being soldiers 2 days ago. We're something else now." The jeep's headlights flickered on, twin beams cutting through the mist. Red blinked. "Where are we going?" McAllister grinned, tired, grim, certain, to laugh one more time. At dawn, the German camp stirred uneasily. General Klausner hadn't slept. His eyes were hollow, his patience gone. All through the night, his men had reported phantom sounds, an engine in the trees, laughter echoing in the fog, flashes of light that vanished before anyone could reach them. Morale was collapsing. The men refused to move alone, and even the tank crews jumped at shadows. When the first shot came at sunrise, nobody reacted at first. They thought it was just another ghost. But then a second, sharper one followed, and then a third. A sentry cried out, pointing toward the ridge. Through the morning mist came the unmistakable whine of an engine, that same engine, small, defiant, mocking. The jeep burst from the tree line like a green comet, tearing through the snow, its white star glinting in the weak sunlight. On its hood, the American flag, painted in grime and soot, seemed to glow. "It's them!" shouted one soldier. Klausner stepped out of his tent, his greatcoat flaring in the wind. His face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible!" But there it was, the ghost that refused to die. Machine guns opened fire, bullets tearing up the snow. The jeep swerved, tires kicking up a spray of white. Red leaned out, firing in short, controlled bursts, picking off the gunners who tried to draw a bead on them. "Hold steady!" McAllister shouted over the chaos. "Steady?" Red yelled back. "You call this steady?" The jeep tore through the camp, weaving between tanks and burning crates. A fuel truck exploded behind them, the blast wave pushing them forward like the wind of destiny itself. The Germans scrambled in every direction, their once mighty formation reduced to chaos by a single, relentless machine. Klausner roared orders, but his voice was lost beneath the thunder of engines and gunfire. "Destroy them! Wipe them out!" 3 Panzers swung their turrets toward the jeep. McAllister saw it, the cold flash of steel, the slow, precise aim of the cannons. He turned sharply, heading straight for the bridge they'd destroyed days earlier, now partially rebuilt with timber and iron beams. "Tell me you're not," Red started. But McAllister didn't answer. He drove harder. Bullets whistled past, ricocheting off the fenders. The jeep hit the bridge, planks cracking under its weight. Behind them, a Panzer shell struck the edge, splintering the wood. The jeep lurched, barely holding together. Smoke trailed from the exhaust, the tires squealing against ice.
"McAllister! Red!" shouted. "We're not going to make it!"
The captain's voice was calm. "Then we make it count."
He threw something small and metal into Red's hands, a detonator. Red's eyes widened. C4? McAllister nodded. Under the bridge, set when we crossed. Realization hit him like thunder. You crazy? Crazy doesn't lose wars, McAllister said. Fear does. The jeep cleared the last plank of the bridge just as another shell hit behind them. The entire structure groaned, then erupted in a roar of fire and splintering wood. The blast hurled the jeep forward, flipping it onto its side in the snow. Red coughed, dazed, crawling from the wreckage. McAllister was still inside, blood streaking his temple. "Captain!" He stirred, eyes barely open. "You all right, Red?" Yeah, I think so." McAllister looked past him toward the bridge. The German tanks were gone, swallowed by smoke, flame, and falling debris. The explosion had taken the crossing and everything on it. "They can't cross now," McAllister whispered. "Division'll be safe. They'll never get through." Red gripped his hand. "We did it, sir. You did it." McAllister smiled faintly. "No, she did it." He glanced at the jeep, half buried in snow, its metal scarred and smoking. The little machine had done what no one thought possible. It had outsmarted an army. The captain's eyes closed slowly. "Tell them," the jeep laughed last. The wind carried his words away. Hours later, American reinforcements arrived. They found the wreckage still smoking, the bridge destroyed, and the valley littered with burnt-out tanks. And there, half covered by snow, was the jeep, a symbol of impossible defiance. One of the soldiers knelt beside it, brushing off the snow to reveal the star on the hood. "Guess she went down fighting," he said softly. The story spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, soldiers across the front were whispering about the laughing commanders, 2 Americans and a jeep that fought an entire Panzer division to a standstill. To the Germans, it became a ghost story. They spoke of an engine that haunted the Ardennes, of a laugh that echoed in the smoke. To the Allies, it became legend, a story of courage, ingenuity, and the spirit that refused to surrender. And somewhere, deep in that silent forest, when the wind blows through the trees just right, they say you can still hear it, the faint hum of an engine and the soft echo of laughter, carried on the snow. The laughter of men who faced steel with courage, and of a jeep that would not die.